You know that scene in Supernatural where Dean gets teleported to the apocalyptic future and God's advice to him was,
you hoard toilet paper. Hoard it. Hoard it like it's made of gold.
Well, it seems like a lot of people took that seriously. I would even say beyond seriously, because the jellycat toilet paper roll has been out of stock for as long as I've been looking at it. So, you know what that means. We've got to make our own. Hi, my name is Emily, and I am an amateur doll maker. Here's what we have to work with. Various types of white fabric. This brown sample fabric that kind of looks like cardboard on the backside. This big roll of brown fabric that isn't mine, so I'm gonna have to ask for permission. And a big sack of cotton batting. And of course some doll eyes. In terms of avoiding being sued by Jellycat, here's what I have in mind. I'm going to switch out what the face looks like. Instead of a jagged edge, I'm going to do a scalloped edge like Charmin Ultra Soft. Don't sue me, Charmin. Aside from that, I'm also going to apply a quilted surface to the toilet paper, so it's more luxury and fancy expensive. Alright, let's get started. I began with Excuse me, let me remove my cat from the premises. As I was saying, I began with sketching out a pattern, and references are of utmost importance here. I rounded the circumferences and the height to the nearest inch because any fraction more complex than 1/2 is just too annoying to work with. And then, with the power of a circumference calculator and Photoshop, I printed out very precise circles that I could work with. And of course, I had to pull up references from the Jellycat archives. They just stick the extra flap directly into the roll itself, but I'm going to try to make it more seamless looking, like it's coming naturally off of the roll, like a real toilet paper roll would. I've never actually seen one of these rolls in real life, so it seems like it actually does have quilting as well, but we're gonna make ours more pronounced with the cotton batting, and I'll show you guys when we actually get to that step. It's feet, it's corduroy. I do have brown corduroy. Oh, they look like little marshmallows, so cute. See this scalloped edge? This is what we want. The dimensions of the inner tube was pretty easy to figure out, but the outer tube, it's gonna take some finagling. It has to be at least 4.5, which is the height, and 15, which is the circumference. But I also have to take into account the extra flap, which I'm not sure how long I'm gonna make it yet, and then I have to remember to add the 1/2 inch seam allowance on everything. Now I'm going to really quickly sketch out what the extra flap should look like. So I think we're going to need 2 of this. One to be on its own and one to attach to the outer tube to create that seamless look. For the mock-up, we're going to use this white IKEA bedsheet and this other scrap of beige bedsheet. I cannot tell you how much I love perusing the bedsheets and linen section in thrift stores. They're just full of such interesting patterns and textures and materials, like this froggy quilt that I got for $3. So for the middle hole, we are not going to cut it out circularly, and instead we're going to trace it out with a marker and then crisscross cut it as a form of seam allowance. And so I did exactly that, marking out the crisscrosses and cutting the circle open like many little pizza slices. These pieces definitely need to be ironed. Now we're also going to cut out the outer tube and the flap in the cotton batting. But I think we're going to cut just up to here, so we're leaving the scalloped edge free of batting, just to make sure it's as crisp as possible. I also realized I should probably avoid overlapping the batting too much with the seam allowance as well, again just to make sure the edges are nice and crisp. So I think later on I'll have to draft up separate pattern pieces for the batting, but since this is just a mock-up, it doesn't really matter, so I'm just gonna move ahead. I was also thinking for the inner tube, maybe we could get some spirals in here just to make it look extra realistic. It looks a little wrinkly right now, and that's because there was something wrong with my bobbin that I didn't know how to fix. Anyway, now we're going to fold together, match the short sides, and sew that together. The spiral lines should match up. See, all the lines line up. Yay! And now we can attach the tube to the top. And much like with my brick doll, first I flipped the tubes right side out. See? Perfect spiral. Inserted one end through the circle with the right sides of the fabric facing until the seam allowance is reached. Then it gets pinned in place and hand stitched together. And now we have both tops sewn onto the tube. If you remember for my brick video, I had to do the thing where I split the tube itself in half and then stitch both sides separately and then ladder stitch everything in the middle. But that was just because it would have been impossible to flip the entire brick through the tube, like I'm about to do now with this toilet paper roll. And I'm really hoping that I can get away with this single tube method just because it's so much more convenient. In the next round, I'll definitely need interfacing on at least a tube, if not the entire doll. I just didn't want to waste any for the mock-up. Next, we're going to quilt the flap and the outer tube, and I think this is how I'm going to do it. Although it is nigh impossible to tell from the footage, basically I drew out a checkered quilt pattern and then pinned the batting to the wrong side of the fabric, and then I simply put it through the machine. Here's the final result. I think the checker is a little too tall and skinny for my liking, so for the actual outer tube, I'm going to try to space out the lines a little more so that it's a little more cubular. I think ideally you would do this with chalk. I do have a chalk thingy, this thing, but it doesn't really work. See? Nothing comes out. I tried a longer stitch length and honestly it looks even more toilet paper-like. So I finished up the quilting with that longer stitch length, which had the added bonus of taking less time. And yes, that is a pretzel on the back of my hand. Now for the perpendicular direction. Ta-da! Nice and quilted, and so much better than the previous one. Now we're going to attach the flap to the outer tube, just matching up the scalloped edge and then sewing all the way around, leaving this side open. I'm curious to see how the scalloped edge will turn out because it looks almost too subtle right now. If it ends up actually being too subtle after I sew it together, then in the next round I'll have to do more pronounced scallops. Yeah, the scallops definitely need to be more dramatic. Let me write that down in my notebook, wherever I put it. Bigger scallops. Okay, now attaching this to the top-bottom tube combo. See, attaching it to one side would be easy, but the problem is how to finagle it around to attach it to the other side and still be able to flip it inside out. But before any mental contortion could occur, first I had to stay stitched around the outside of the circle and notch it. Then I did a simple step of attaching the outer tube to one of these circles. Now I have to figure out how to sew the other end of this outer tube to the bottom circle. The plan was, when I was thinking about this project, is to be able to turn everything inside out through the hole between the flap and the outer tube. I don't know if that'll work, and I'll only find out if I just get sewing. But before we close up the bottom, we have to add the face. Over here? That seems like a good place. What the heck? It's so cute. I'm debating if I should try making feet. And I figure that instead of trying to copy Jellycat's very complex feet, I'm just going to do my typical semicircles. Feet, I have these stuffed with normal stuffing, and now I'm going to base them under the face, like so. Now for the very annoying part, figuring out how to attach the circle to the other end of the outer tube. So I put on these stickers just to visualize which part has to meet which part. And let me flip this back inside out. This needs to meet up like this. This, however, is impossible to sew on the machine. This This, however, much more doable. So I think I'm going to pin it together as far as I can get and then just see what happens.
And then it was time for one of my least favorite activities, sewing around a circle.
So I sewed around the circle as much as I could, but now the tube is officially in the way. So I'm just going to end the stitch, move the tube to the other side, and then continue stitching from there. Okay, now let's try flipping it inside out. Yay, it worked! And now we can stuff the doll through that same hole. I dropped a single bead somewhere and now I can't find it. Now we just ladder stitch the opening shut. Ta-da! V1 is done. So, what are my thoughts? I was pondering if maybe I should double up the cotton batting just so the quilted surface looks even more dramatic. I think I would attach the flap to the outer tube before quilting everything so that this stays flat together, essentially be like top stitching. Oh yeah, and for the mouth, I think I just want the single line, like meep. So let me write all that down in my notebook and then we can move on to V2. Guess what I finally got? A race car rewinder! Woo! This one I got for $3 and it is from September 23rd, 1994. Does this work? I have no idea because it did not come with a cable, so I can't test it. But I can confirm that a VHS does fit inside. One of my fondest childhood memories was having a red race car rewinder, so this was such a treat to find in a thrift store. And for the record, I do have a VCR, and I have a few tapes. I have Treasure Planet, the original trilogy of Star Wars, and also Die Hard 1, 2, and 3. There's my Star Wars collection, right there. And one day I would like to acquire Mulan and Hercules.
So anyway, back to the doll. First, I wanted to digitize the entire pattern now that I had all the measurements figured out. I tested out a few different scallop designs and ended up with this cute bumpy one that is sure to be more distinct than the previous one, even if a real toilet paper would never look like this.
Now we just tape this together.
With some confidence in my freshly printed pattern, I broke out this crinkly cream-colored fabric that I thought would work perfectly for that paper texture. But because it was quite floppy, I attached some interfacing to it. And then I popped the tags on that cardboard-like brown polypropylene fabric and applied some stiff interfacing on it. This was a very crappy dollar store interfacing, don't make the same mistake as me.
I realized that using a thick fabric with this stiff interfacing might make the tube impossible to flip inside out, which I do need to do multiple times throughout this project. Let's just try it out. So this time, before I sew together the short sides, I'm actually going to stay stitch the top and bottom seam allowances, and that should make sewing it onto these circles a lot more precise. And of course, we gotta add the spirals. I'm gonna be real, this does not feel like it'll be easy to turn inside out.
But I gave it a go anyway, and it did work, but it was so resistant that I decided to.
So I made a few changes. I spaced out these spiral lines a bit more because I was studying a real toilet paper roll, as one does, and realized that's what they look like. And also, I remembered to iron the flaps flat this time around. But the problem is, for some reason the inner tube doesn't fit properly in the hole anymore. And I noticed this with the previous version as well, and I assumed it was because this fabric was too thick. But now I'm thinking maybe my math was wrong. Let me go double check. The numbers are right, so I don't know why it doesn't fit in real life. I think maybe I was tracing the holes literally just like 1 millimeter smaller than it is in the cutout, and that's enough to make such a big difference.
And so I had to snip away at the circle and make the pizza slices larger. And then I sewed the circles onto the tube and flipped the concoction inside out.
So previously I said I might draw up a different pattern piece for the cotton batting, but actually I think it's not necessary because it's a very simple shape to cut out. It's just 4.5 by 18 inches and you just need 2 of them.
This time, before attaching the batting to the fabric, I'm first sewing on the extra flap.
I almost forgot. Before we stitch these two together, we have to stay stitch the seam allowance on the flap and the outer piece. Ding ding! And the reason we're doing this is because these two make up the flaps of the final opening where we turn everything inside out and stuff the doll. So these stay stitchings will provide a nice guide for when we're ladder stitching the opening together. Alright, now we can stitch the flap on.
Admittedly, I did maybe not such a good job at stitching these scallops. Listen man, the machine does not like tight curves. But anyway, I trimmed down the edges and flipped the flap inside out, and take a gander at how much more scallopy it is. Next, I simply tucked the batting between the two, pinned the layers together, and got to quilting.
Look at this quilted beauty. Now we attach these two together. Let me tell you, this was not easy to sew with the big stiff tube in the way.
Before sewing the other end together, I applied the face and the feet. This time I used brown fabric instead of white because I just like the color contrast better.
For the next iteration, I think I would prefer to have a different brown fabric for the feet. Something furrier and softer because this is just like trench coat material. But I don't have any currently, so I'd have to look for some in my next thrifting run. Now it's finally time to sew up the bottom. So I managed to sew one side on the machine, but the other half is nigh impossible to reach, so I'm gonna have to do it by hand. I ended up ladder stitching the rest of the hole because there's just literally no way I was gonna be able to fit my hand in there. And it actually turned out pretty good. I don't know if I'm just getting better at ladder stitching or it was just easier to follow the stay stitching that I did in the first few steps. There is some wrinkles, but this is actually from when I was using the machine because it was very unwieldy. But yeah, anyway, time to stuff this little guy.
Excuse the slightly deranged giggle, but have you seen how cute it is? There were a few problems I had to address for V3. Aside from the aforementioned wrinkle and the fact I want a different fabric for the feet, there was also some raw edge peeking out right here. But besides all that, I love the off-white fabric, I love the double layer batting, and I love how seamless and perfect the flap turned out.
I think I may incorporate notches into the pattern, just so it's easier to line up all the pieces. I'm sorry, Milo, I'm bothering you in your sleep. Aww. I just spent like half an hour trying to figure out if I'm putting the notches in the right places. I mean, I think it's right, but I won't really know until I try printing it out again.
But then I decided I didn't want to use more paper, so I drew the notches onto the existing pattern and snipped them out. After that, all I needed to get started on V3 was just some nicer brown fabric.
In the beginning of the video, I literally said that I had brown corduroy. I do have brown corduroy. But I guess I just completely forgot about it. Anyway, brown corduroy.
You know the saying, when one door closes, another one opens? Well, in my case, when one door opens, another one closes. Because even though I was elated to remember that I have brown corduroy, I also quickly realized I don't have enough interfacing, and the idea of going out to buy more sounded like too much of a hassle, so
I guess in the meantime I can make some feet.
I also figured that if I put the inner tube on a bias on the corduroy, it'll naturally create the spiral. So I whipped out my protractor and excuse my cat, unnecessarily measured out a 45-degree bias. And then I remembered that aside from my non-woven interfacing, I also had a bit of cloth interfacing left from my brick doll, so I used that for the circles.
I'm going to try piecing all of this interfacing together to see if it can cover the outer tube. I think this will do just fine. Also, can you see the foresight I put into this, doing this at the ironing table instead of having to transfer everything over afterwards? This is how much interfacing I have left.
This time, to ensure less jagged scallops, I drew them out so I could follow the line with the needle.
Quilted, edges slitted. I did a stay stitching on this as well, and now we're going to attach this to one of these circles matching the new notches we made.
I decided to hand sew everything since the idea of feeding it through the machine was unbearable.
Once again, be careful not to accidentally sew the flap into this, and make sure the raw edge here and here are matching up.
Same as before, I am sewing across as far as I can before flipping everything right side out and ladder stitching the rest from the outside. And then I stuffed the doll and stitched it up, and here was where I was supposed to be done, and I was supposed to say that everything was ready for the final reveal. But even though V3 was pretty dang perfect compared to the others, I just couldn't shake the idea that I was way overcomplicating the process. While making V3, I was keeping notes on what to put in the instructions, because yes, I do plan to have e-patterns available for this, and there are just some steps that I literally can't put into words because even I struggle to understand it in my own brain. And so
I made another mock-up. I know it looks the same as before, but the order of operations is a little bit different. What I realized was that because I was trying so hard to make both circles attached to the tube at the same time, it was basically making the entire process incredibly convoluted. So I've switched things up a little because I figured that if I'm going to end up doing ladder stitching at the end anyway, I might as well do it somewhere that is less conspicuous and requiring less stitches. So instead of stitching around the outside, I decided that instead I'm going to ladder stitch the inner tube to the circle. And I'll show you how I went about that. But first, let's get some more interfacing. I'm back from the store, and now let me show you what I got. I got 5 meters of interfacing. I got this finger pressing sleeve for ironing for 99 cents. I make a lot of small things, and this will probably eventually come in handy. My sister gave me more mystery beige fabric. Could be useful for if I decide to make another toilet paper. And lastly, I got some chalk pencils, which is exactly what I wanted. Now let's get making.
here are some of the many mysteries surrounding my darling cat Mika, like why doesn't he understand the concept of basking, and why did he destroy my fabric pen? Anywho, as I correctly predicted, I found a use for my new finger sleeve right away.
So here I have everything prepped the same as they were before. Circles are top stitched inside and outside. Tube is all done. The outer tube is they stitched all the way around here and then quilted. Here is where things start to diverge. We're going to apply the face first. So with the face and feet attached, we're going to pin on the bottom circle without the tube attached. Making sure the feet are the same length. Nice. And now we attach the inner tube to the bottom hole. Now I'm going to clip the tube and then flip just the tube inside out. And now before we attach the circle to the top, we're going to iron the flaps inwards, like so. And here is where we're going to ladder stitch the tube onto the circle. I think if you were smart, you would do this on the bottom of the roll where it's not going to be visible. So clearly I'm not that smart.
And at long last, I can finally say it is time for the final reveal. If you would like to make your own Charmaine toilet paper roll, I will have the digital pattern up on my Etsy for a while. You can find a link in the description box below, and thank you for watching!